Kia ora, I'm Sharon Brett-Kelly. Today on The Detail, citizens arrests armed guards and the power of Sunny Kaushal, one man on a 10-year mission to crack retail crime who is a step closer to getting his way.
It is quite incredible that he has kind of come up against all of these people, all of his colleagues essentially, saying all sorts of stuff, a little bit tunnel vision, and that has worked. They accepted the group's recommendations and now it's proposed legislation.
There's been one aspect that seems to be the most controversial, and that's the citizens' arrest powers. We've heard from two quite strong groups, which is Retail New Zealand and the Police Association, since the submissions closed last week, that they have some serious concerns.
We look at the collapse of the government advisory group Sunny Kaushal heads, the questions over where more than $1 million was spent, and why proposed changes to the Crimes Act are causing alarm. RNZ's Checkpoint senior producer Louisa Cleave has been investigating the story with reporter Jimmy Allingham. Let's look first at the Ministerial Advisory Group for Victims of Retail Crime.
This group was introduced in mid-2024. It was a 5-member group, and the chair was Sunny Kaushal, who really became well known in about 2022-23 on a nationwide level anyway, when there was the retail crime spike in Auckland.
If they try to protect themselves, they get charged. If they do not protect themselves, they get stabbed. So what do they do?
And he was the face of the Dairy Owners Association and just for dairy owners in response to that. So we had this Ministerial Advisory Group created in mid-2024, and it did its work for 18 months or so. But as we reported on Checkpoint earlier this year, 3 of the 5 members had resigned either late last year or earlier this year. And that included Lindsay Rolls from Foodstuffs and Michael Bell from Michael Hill, but also Carolyn Young from Retail NZ, who had some high-profile differences of opinion with Sunny Kaushal.
Carolyn, can you be more specific, please? You say that the relationship with the chair became untenable. What was he saying to you?
Well, obviously we know that there was the issues previously around what the Dairy Owners Association put out about me, which was a personal attack on me. There have been conversations within the MAG around that, which were less than satisfactory answers, and just some ongoing comms that had come from Sunny about communication that I'd done and engagement that I'd had, and it just felt like it was a continual battle to constantly be able to speak about what retailers are really looking for and how that plays out.
And then just a couple of weeks after that, the Justice Minister, Paul Goldsmith, said the group would be wound up in May. So that's 4 months earlier than we expected.
Why was this group set up in the first place? Was it because at the time there seemed to be a ram raid a day almost or an attack on a dairy, and some of them were very violent attacks? I mean, there was even at least one death.
Yes, and that death in 2022, that was one where Sunny Kaushal came out very strongly, arguing for harsher penalties and just something to be done. And in the press release that Paul Goldsmith and the Associate Minister Nicole McKee put out, they cited a figure of an 86% increase in retail crime over 5 years. And Sunny Kaushal too likes to talk about, when I've spoken to him, he said retail crime costs $2.7 billion a year in New Zealand. So this was set up in response to that. And the objectives at the time, it was said, were to do the likes of empowering security guards at retail premises and give business owners of retailers a bit more power to deal with shoplifting. And there was also some mention of facial recognition technology. So this group was set up to look into those issues.
I suppose a lot of people would think, well, isn't this a good thing? A special group being set up to tackle what a lot of people saw as a really big problem at the time, Louisa. What's gone wrong? What's happened?
These are not uncommon groups. The ministers often set them up to provide some expert advice to them on various issues, and we can get into that we've looked at some others, and just by way of comparison to the time spent and what they get for the time and money that they put into to the groups. So it's not unusual this was set up, and the remit was sort of a bit of a blank canvas. The minister said, has said on our show that, I want them to throw any and every idea at me. they might want to push the barrow too far, he said on one occasion around pepper spray, a case where the minister considered that was a bit step too far because it doesn't seem he's ever picked up on that and run with it.
And their role, this ministerial advisory group, was to come up with recommendations. Was that the main reason for its existence?
Yes, to provide some expert advice on a number of areas that would help retailers in their fight against crime, which, as you've laid out, had increased significantly, costing a lot of money. They wanted to look at what powers that they need. And I think the group, had a really great mix of people. It had from small businesses, Dairy Owners Association, right through to Retail New Zealand and the Michael Hills and Foodstuffs. So it seemed from the outset to have a very good scope of experts, which is what these things are about. But somewhere along the way, something went wrong here.
I had actually been thinking about Sunny for years, way back when he was quite often in the media speaking on behalf of small business owners, but particularly dairy owners around ram raids and things like that.
The spin-off special correspondent Madeline Chapman has poured over pages and pages of material on Sunny Kaushal going back years.
And I remember wondering, as you always wonder with any spokesperson, what their dynamic was like with the people that they represent. Because sometimes he would have some quite out there opinions about what should be done. And I always wondered if that was his personal opinion or if he really was speaking for the majority of dairy owners and, had sometimes heard or seen people disagreeing with him in the comments or online who were also dairy owners. So he was always very interesting to me as a very vocal spokesperson, and usually, like every spokesperson, there'll be people who they are speaking for who also disagree with them.
What did you find when you started digging into it? And you say that you've gone through a lot of information about him.
I actually found that I was quite almost impressed by how consistent he has been. He has been talking about needing to go tough on crime, particularly around businesses, for the better part of 10 years now. And I had expected him to have adjusted some of his stances or communications. Obviously, if you're talking to lots of people, you might change your mind about some things. But he has really been on the same beat for the whole 10 years, which part of me goes, that seems kind of strange for somebody who's speaking and canvassing lots of opinions, the same quite strong opinion that whole time. Another part of me was surprised that he has kept the energy and the momentum. And I think that is why he has had such staying power, is that, as you and I both know as journalists, you always need to talk to somebody. And so he has been extremely available and consistent and able to give that same perspective no matter who asks, for 10 years. And so as a person who wanted something done, it is actually quite impressive that he nearly single-handedly has just managed to keep saying that for 10 years, and now it might actually happen.
Throughout this time, the key thing that he wants, does it boil down to having armed guards at every shopping centre and giving the power to ordinary people to make the citizen's arrest? Is that really the main thing that he wants?
Yes, but I think when you really read into everything that he has said for many years, which I found myself doing, a lot of it is actually about he wants people who commit these crimes to be punished. So he's all about more police, longer sentences, making it easier to charge people who commit these crimes, and potentially the most literal punishment, essentially allowing either security guards or shop owners to, in a sense, fight back, which is the citizen's arrest. It's one of those ones that is a natural human response. If you see somebody getting beaten up or having these horrible things happen to them, you want them to be able to fight back. By the time you get into the policy level or the high end, usually that sort of human emotional reaction has filtered down and you start looking at systemic issues and social issues and all of that stuff. But he has just stayed in that emotional space of these people need to be punished. Here is the quickest way to punish them. 1, allow basically members of the public to fight them or detain them. 2, throw them in prison. 3, arrest them quickly with more cops. He is very angry about these things happening and he wants those people to be punished. And those seem to be, to him, the most efficient way to punish those people.
The other side of this is the politics, and what you've found is pretty interesting. I mean, he kind of started with Labour, but he has since switched to National. Tell me about that.
Yeah, he was a really enthusiastic member of the Labour Party who, by the sounds of his candidate announcement in 2011, seemed committed to essentially campaigning within the New Zealand Indian community to move some votes from National to Labour. And he was very passionate about that. Around 2017, obviously the 2017 election, it was my understanding, which he did not confirm or deny, that he was starting to campaign to be the candidate in New Lynn. And that ended up being given to Deborah Russell. And then very shortly after, he announced that he was switching and would be a member of the National Party. That was also in early 2017 was when he started going quite hard on his, tough on crime retail group stuff. And again, from comments that he's made, it sounds like his ideas that he was presenting to Labour were not being picked up. They were not being met very enthusiastically within the Labour Party. So he obviously must have found more kinship with the National Party, and as soon as Labour won the 2017 election and he was in the opposition party again, all of the national opposition MPs had a lot of time for him. They attended his meetings, they, took his calls, and so he then really started going hard for National after that.
And was very critical at the same time of the Labour government's policies on retail crimes, saying they were too soft.
It's really frustrating at this stage because, at the end of the day, there are a number of people, their lives are at risk. Their properties are at risk. And whereas we are not seeing any difference of what has happened so far in terms of the actions from police or the announcements from law and order authorities.
It was sort of him criticising on behalf of small business owners that would get picked up by National MPs as a kind of, we've spoken to the people on the ground, they agree with the National line. And that just essentially continued until National got into government.
Do you think he's making a play for politics now, it being election year?
I did ask him that outright, which he did not respond to. But I think just based off the fact that he was a Labour candidate and then left the Labour Party, he is now very much tied to the National Party. The way he presents himself is very much like a politician. He is obviously very comfortable talking to the media. He knows how to give his lines. He's got platforms, essentially. So I think maybe not with the Retail Advisory Group news, but certainly at the start of this year, I would have guessed that he would be eyeing up some sort of candidacy in the 2026 election. But now I'm not sure.
With the controversy over that, you wonder if that's tainted him a bit.
I would say even just how he responded to the controversy, which is essentially to act as though there was no controversy.
I'm very proud of the progress achieved and the quality of policy work produced, and we're getting strong appreciation from retailers and the police across New Zealand. In fact, the retailers, they finally feel heard.
Which is a very politically astute way to respond to a controversy. I think he would still be up for it. It's just whether or not the National Party is willing to keep that relationship very public, because it is now very much seen as a public relationship between the National Party and Sunny, and whether they still want that to be the case.
Louisa Cleave and Jimmy Ellingham have been digging into the ministerial advisory groups and compared budgets. They found that Sunny Kaushal was paid the same daily rate as the chair of another advisory group,
which was $920 a day. Now, he had invoiced pretty much in that period that we looked at 89 days of work out of a potential 102 days of work. So the chairs were able to claim up to 250 days a year, and there's no suggestion that Sunny Kaushal invoice more than that was allowed under the Cabinet guidelines.
Have you calculated altogether how much it is?
The group is winding up now in a couple of months' time, and one of the things we would like to look at is at the close of play, we would be able to get those figures and look at the total cost. I mean, at the moment we've been getting fed drip fed, I suppose, information as we've requested it. Some information's been forthcoming, some has been harder to get hold of. We have a total amount for Chairman Sunny Kaushal's fees, which comes to $238,000.
And Jimmy, so there was that fee, and then there've been questions over their office space or the rent of their office space.
Yes, most of these advisory groups, and as Louisa said, there have been others set up, but they're quite common, and we had a look, and there's been ones, for example, for Māori-led climate action, health reform, school staff settings. Most of them don't have massive office space and a lot of staff supporting them. So this is where this one is different, and we've done some reporting on the office space this one has on Simon Street in central Auckland, and the rent there is $120,000 a year, and it's a space that can accommodate up to 35 or even a few more staff members. And the reason we needed the big space apparently was to have stakeholder engagement meetings. But as of December, only 3 staff members and Sunny Kaushal were based there. It also wasn't the office space recommended by Ministry of Justice officials. They had a slightly cheaper option that was an office sharing arrangement with Kāinga Ora. But Sunny Kaushal said that wasn't suitable because he couldn't have private conversations there. There are other costs too. We've looked into the costs of, say, contractors, and we found out that late last year there were 3 contractors on over $1,000 a day for the work they were doing. And TV1 has recently reported that the spend on contractors is over $1 million for this retail crime advisory group. And you can compare that with, say, $180,000 for the transnational serious and organised crime group. There's a catering bill we've reported on for $24,000 for stakeholder meetings around New Zealand. And a couple of those meetings, the catering rose to $4,000, and that was where Paul Goldsmith, the Justice Minister, said, in his opinion, there were too many scones there. So perhaps what makes this group stand out is just the money that's been spent on it.
There's been trouble there for months, we could say, several months. And Louisa, what does it have to show for for all the money that's been spent, but also the time and, the expertise?
Well, Sunny Kaushal, of course, in his discussions with us, has been very defensive of the work. One of the concerns within the group, I understand, is there was no foundational document when they set out to do this work. They never sat down apparently and said, what is it we want to achieve here? And what we've heard is that because there has been no foundational document, that then a lot of ideas have been sort of come into the mix. And they're not always agreed upon. There's obviously concerns within the Security Association about some of them, within the Police Association. Whether that is all being picked up by the justice officials and the minister, we're just not too sure whose voice has been listened to the most. Some might say that some voices have been listened to more than others.
Yeah, well, Sunny Kaushal has told us when we have spoken to him, to use his words, I'm on a mission, and that's really what it seems like here. And he does point out that this group has produced, he cites 5 reports that have gone to the minister for consideration, the likes of citizens' arrests, self-defence, and lifting the thresholds for shoplifting offences, tougher penalties, that sort of work. He also points out that the group is operating under its $1.8 million annual budget, and that budget is from the proceeds of crime funds. So it's not coming from tax money as such, it's coming from criminals essentially are paying for this group's work.
Submissions to the Crimes Bill amendment have closed, and Madeline's read through them. She says they show that the members of the advisory group didn't disagree on everything. Tighter trespassing laws, for example, have got broad support,
which would essentially allow for businesses to more easily trespass repeat offenders from their stores. That has not turned into any proposed legislation yet, but it's still happening. It's still being discussed. They proposed making shoplifting specifically its own offence, which I believe is now at part of the proposals to the changes to the Crimes Act.
Mm-hmm.
Very much business specific and related to every retail business. The citizen's arrest one is certainly the most public, the most extreme, and also not actually specifically related to retail crime. That is a very broad change to the Crimes Act and would relate to just any member of the public at any time. And so it is quite interesting that the number one sort of big splash recommendation from the Retail Crime Advisory Group is actually just about crime in general and not necessarily retail crime. Yeah, it's got a ways to go, but it has come a long way, and sort of Sunny has really managed to kind of push that through on his own, because he's been met with a lot of resistance from all angles, and yet there it is going to select committee. So an incredible achievement on his part, really.
And when you say a lot of resistance, what, retailers are resistant to it? They don't like it?
Yeah, so Carolyn Young was the representative for Retail NZ, which itself has about 5,000 members or shop fronts, essentially, that it represents around the country. Their group recommendation was that we do not think this is a good idea. Offenders will just arm themselves accordingly. And, you just create a more dangerous environment. The Motor Transport Association, which represents the majority of petrol stations, who obviously have experienced a lot of crime, they were against any sort of citizen's arrest or any sort of expectation that your regular retail worker should be trying to stop armed offenders. Currently, what they do is say, keep safe, make sure people are safe. The person will likely leave, call the police. They were very against it. So that's quite a large proportion already. And then when you read the submissions, some of them are quite strongly worded about how ridiculous they thought this very idea sounded. So really, when I was looking through all of the submissions that they presented, they're kind of summarised as being that there were lots of small business owners very open and enthusiastic about the idea, and some of the big retailers were less enthusiastic. But when you actually go in and read all of them, even a lot of those small business owners, like the petrol station owners and the small businesses within Retail NZ, were also quite adamantly against it. And even the New Zealand Security Association, who represent security personnel, they didn't think security guards should be armed with any sort of dangerous weapon, including tasers and things like that, and batons, which is what was suggested. So there was a lot of pushback, but what really pushed it forward is that Sunny was speaking as himself, as the chair of the advisory group. Ash Palmer, who was the other only remaining member, was speaking as himself as a member of the advisory group. Each of them also essentially submitted on behalf of other groups. So Sunny wrote a submission on behalf of the Dairy and Business Owners Group, very much in favour. And then Ash Palmer signed off on a submission for the Hamilton Small Business Owners Group, and that was very much in favour. And those two were kind of the only big groups that were in favour of this, and they both had members on the advisory group who were very in favour. So it actually, when you start looking at it, you go, maybe the group is not so big, but it certainly has been presented as being very much supported by lots of retail owners, and actually it seems like most of them are quite against it.
That's it for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. This episode was produced by Gwen McClure and engineered by William Saunders. Thanks to Madeline Chapman, Louisa Cleave and Jimmy Ellingham. I'm Sharon Brett Kelly. Ka kite.